Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We're going to start a new book this session. It's called The Octopus, A Story of California. It's written by Frank Norris, the author, and of course we will start in chapter 1. I've actually read this book before. It's been a number of years, and really the only reason I ever picked it up is I learned that it was about wheat farming and about California, which is the state in the U.S. just to the south of where I live. I live in Oregon, to the north of California. The setting of this is way back in the day, and of course this book is being read from the Gutenberg Project, which catalogs and warehouses thousands of books now that you can read online if you wish, where the copyrights have fully expired. So once again, it is called The Octopus, A Story of California by Frank Norris. We begin our reading in chapter 1. Just after passing Caraher's saloon on the county road that ran south from Bonneville and that divided the Broderson Ranch from that of Los Muertos, Presley was suddenly aware of the faint and prolonged blowing of a steam whistle that he knew must come from the railroad shops near the depot at Bonneville. In starting out from the ranch house that morning, he had forgotten his watch and was now perplexed to know whether the whistle was blowing for his 12 or for 1 o'clock. He hoped the former. Early that morning, he had decided to make a long excursion through the neighboring country, partly on foot and partly on his bicycle, and now noon was come already, and as yet he had hardly started. As he was leaving the house after breakfast, Mrs. Derrick had asked him to go for the mail at Bonneville, and he had not been able to refuse. He took a firmer hold of the cork grips of his handlebars, the road being in a wretched condition after the recent hauling of the crop, and quickened his pace. He told himself that no matter what the time was, he would not stop for luncheon at the ranch house, but could push on to Guadalajara and have a Spanish dinner at Solitari's, as he had originally planned. There had not been much of a crop to haul that year. Half of the wheat on the Broderson Ranch had failed entirely, and Derrick himself had hardly raised more than enough to supply seed for the winter's sowing. But such little hauling as there had been had reduced the roads thereabouts to a lamentable condition, and during the dry season of the past few months, the layer of dust had deepened and thickened to such an extent that more than once Presley was obliged to dismount and trudge along on foot, pushing his bicycle in front of him. It was the last half of September, the very end of the dry season, and all Tulare County, all the vast reaches of the San Joaquin Valley, in fact all the south central California, was bone dry, parched, and baked and crisped after 4 months of cloudless weather, when the day seemed always at noon and the sun blasted white hot over the valley from the Coast Range in the west to the foothills of the Sierras in the east. As Presley drew near to the point where what was known as the lower road struck off through the Rancho de los Muertos, leading on to Guadalajara, he came upon one of the county watering tanks, a great iron-hooped tower of wood, straddling clumsily on its 4 uprights by the roadside. Since the day of its completion, the storekeepers and retailers of Bonneville had painted their advertisements upon it. It was a landmark. In that reach of level fields, the white letters upon it could be read for miles. A watering trough stood nearby, and as he was very thirsty, Presley resolved to stop for a moment to get a drink. He drew abreast of the tank and halted there, leaning his bicycle against the fence. A couple of men in white overalls were repainting the surface of the tank, seated on swinging platforms that hung by hooks from the roof. They were painting a sign, an advertisement. It was all but finished and read, S. Behrman Real Estate Mortgages, Main Street, Bonneville, opposite the post office. On the horse trough that stood in the shadow of the tank was another freshly painted inscription. S. Behrman has something to say to you. As Presley straightened up after drinking from the faucet at the one end of the horse trough, the watering cart itself labored into view around the turn of the lower road. 2 mules and 2 horses, white with dust, strained leisurely in the traces, moving at a snail's pace, their limp ears marking the time, while perched high upon the seat under a yellow cotton wagon umbrella. Presley recognized Hooven, one of Derek's tenants, a German, whom everyone called Bismarck, an excitable little man with a perpetual grievance and an endless flow of broken English. "Hello, Bismarck," said Presley as Hooven brought his team to a standstill by the tank, preparatory to refilling. "You's the man I look for, Mr. Presley," cried the other, twisting the reins around the brake. "You's 1 minute you wait, eh? I want to talk with you." Presley was impatient to be on his way again. A little more time wasted and the day would be lost. He had nothing to do with the management of the ranch, and if Hooven wanted any advice from him, it was so much breath wasted. These uncouth brutes of farmhands and petty ranchers, grimed with the soil they worked upon, were odious to him beyond words. Never could he feel in sympathy with them, nor with their lives, their ways, their marriages, deaths, bickerings, and all the monotonous round of their sordid existence. "Well, you must be quick about it, Bismarck," he answered sharply. "I'm late for dinner as it is." "So now 2 minutes and I be met you." He drew down the overhanging spout of the tank to the vent in the circumference of the cart and pulled the chain that let out the water. Then he climbed down from the seat, jumping from the tire of the wheel and taking Presley by the arm, and led him a few steps down the road. "Say," he began, "say, I want to have some conversations with you. You's the man I want to see. Say, Caraher, he told me this morning. Say, he told me Mr. Derek going to farm their whole damn ranch himself their next year. No more tenants. Say, Caraher, he told me all their tenants get their sack. Mr. Derek going to work their whole damn ranch himself, hey? Me, I get their sack also, hey? You have hear about those things? Say, me, I have on the ranch been 7 year. Do I also? You'll have to see Derek himself or Heron about that, Bismarck interrupted Presley, trying to draw away. That's something outside me entirely. But Hooven was not to be put off. No doubt he had been meditating his speech all the morning, formulating his words, preparing his phrases. "Say no, he continued. "Me, I want to stay by their place. 7 year I have stay. Mr. Derek, he don't want that I should go get sacked. Who then? Will their ditch get in? Say, you tell 'em Bismarck have got a sure stay by their place. Say, you have to pull me to their governor. You speak their good word for me." "Heron is the man that has the pull with his father, Bismarck," answered Presley. "You get Heron to speak for you, and you're all right." 7 year I have stay, protested Hooven. "And who will their ditch get in? And all of them kettles drive. Well, Heron's your man, answered Presley, preparing to mount his bicycle. Say, you have hear about those thing? I don't hear anything, Bismarck. I don't know the first thing about how the ranch is run. On der pipeline gemeint, Hooven burst out, suddenly remembering a forgotten argument. He waved an arm. Ach, der pipeline by der Mission Greek on der water hole for those kettles. Say, he don't do it himself. Perhaps I don't think. Well, talk to Heron about it. Say, he don't farm their whole damn ranch by himself. Me, I got to stay. But on a sudden, the water in the cart gushed over the sides from the vent in the top with a smart sound of splashing. Hooven was forced to turn his attention to it. Presley got his wheel under way. I have some conversations with Heron, Hooven called after him. He don't do it by himself. Then Mr. Derek, ach no, I stay by the ranch to drive those kettles. He climbed back to his seat under the wagon umbrella, and as he started his team again with great cracks of his long whip, turned to the painter still at work upon the sign, and declared with some defiance, 7 year, yes sir, 7 year I have been on this ranch. Get up, you mule, you hoop. Meanwhile, Presley had turned into the lower road. He was now on Derek's land, Division of 1, or as it was called, the home ranch of the Great Los Muertos Rancho. The road was better here, the dust laid after the passage of Hooven's watering cart, and in a few minutes he had come to the ranch house itself, with its white picket fence, its few flower beds and grove of eucalyptus trees. On the lawn at the side of the house he saw Heron in the act of setting out the automatic sprinkler. In the shade of the house by the porch were 2 or 3 of the greyhounds, part of the pack that were used to hunt down jackrabbits, and Godfrey, Heron's prized deerhound. Presley wheeled up by the driveway and met Heron by the horse block. Heron was Magnus Derek's youngest son, a very well-looking young fellow of 23 or 25. He had the fine carriage that marked his father and still further resembled him in that he had the Derek nose, hawk-like and prominent, such as one sees in the later portraits of the Duke of Wellington. He was blond, and incessant exposure to the sun had, instead of tanning him brown, merely heightened the color of his cheeks. His yellow hair had a tendency to curl in a forward direction just in front of the ears. Beside him, Presley made the sharpest of contrasts. Presley seemed to have come of a mixed origin, appeared to have a nature more composite, a temperament more complex. Unlike Heron Derek, he seemed more of a character than a type. The sun had browned his face till it was almost swarthy. His eyes were a dark brown, and his forehead was the forehead of the intellectual, wide and high, with a certain unmistakable lift about it that argued education, not only of himself, but of his people before him. The impression conveyed by his mouth and chin was that of a delicate and highly sensitive nature, the lips thin and loosely shut together, the chin small and rather receding. One guessed that Presley's refinement had been gained only by a certain loss of strength. One expected to find him nervous, introspective, to discover that his mental life was not at all the result of impressions and sensations that came to him from without, but rather of thoughts and reflections germinating from within. Though morbidly sensitive to changes in his physical surroundings, he would be slow to act upon such sensations, would not prove impulsive, not because he was sluggish, but because he was merely irresolute. It could be foreseen that morally He was of that sort who avoid evil through good taste, lack of decision, and want of opportunity. His temperament was that of the poet. When he told himself he had been thinking, he deceived himself. He had, on such occasions, only been brooding. Some 18 months before this time, he had been threatened with consumption, and, taking advantage of a standing invitation on the part of Magnus Derrick, had come to stay in the dry, even climate of the San Joaquin for an indefinite length of time. He was 30 years old and had graduated and postgraduated with high honors from an Eastern college, where he had devoted himself to a passionate study of literature and, more especially, of poetry. It was his insatiable ambition to write verse, but up to this time his work had been fugitive, ephemeral, a note here and there, heard, appreciated, and forgotten. He was in search of a subject, something magnificent. He did not know exactly what. Some vast, tremendous theme, heroic, terrible, to be unrolled in all the thundering progression of hexameters. But whatever he wrote, and in whatever fashion, Presley was determined that his poem should be of the West, that world's frontier of romance, where a new race, a new people, hardy, brave, and passionate, were building an empire, where the tumultuous life ran like fire from dawn to dark, and from dark to dawn again, primitive, brutal, honest, and without fear. Something, to his idea not much, had been done to catch at that life in passing, but its poet had not yet arisen. The few sporadic attempts, thus he told himself, had only touched the keynote. He strove for the diapason, that great song that should embrace in itself a whole epoch, a complete era, the voice of an entire people, wherein all people should be included, they and their legends, their folklore, their fightings, their loves and their lusts, their blunt, grim humor, their stoicism under stress, their adventures, their treasures found in a day and gambled in a night, their direct, crude speech, their generosity and cruelty, their heroism and bestiality, their religion and profanity, their self-sacrifice and obscenity. A true and fearless setting forth of a passing phase of history, uncompromising, sincere, each group in its proper environment, the valley, the plain, and the mountain, the ranch, the range, and the mine, all this, all the traits and types of every community from the Dakotas to the Mexicos, from Winnipeg to Guadalupe, gathered together, swept together, welded and riven together in one single mighty song, the song of the West. That was what he dreamed. Wild things without names, thoughts for which no man had yet invented words, terrible, formless shapes, vague figures, colossal, monstrous, distorted, whirled at a gallop through his imagination. As Heron came up, Presley reached down into the pouches of the sun-bleached shooting coat he wore and drew out and handed him the packet of letters and papers. "Here's the mail. I think I shall go on." "But dinner is ready," said Heron. "We are just sitting down." Presley shook his head. "No, I'm in a hurry. Perhaps I shall have something to eat at Guadalajara. I shall be gone all day." He delayed a few moments longer, tightening a loose nut on his forward wheel, while Heron, recognizing his father's handwriting on one of the envelopes, lit it open and cast his eye rapidly over its pages. "The governor is coming home," he exclaimed. "Tomorrow morning, on the early train, wants me to meet him with the team of Guadalajara, and," he cried between his clenched teeth, as he continued to read, "we've lost the case." "What case? Oh, in the matter of rates?" Heron nodded, his eyes flashing, his face growing suddenly scarlet. "Olstein gave his decision yesterday," he continued, reading from his father's letter. He holds, Olstein does, that grain rates as low as a new figure would amount to confiscation of property, and that on such a basis the railroad cannot be operated at a legitimate profit. As he is powerless to legislate in the matter, he can only put the rates back at what they originally were before the commissioners made the cut, and it is so ordered. That's our friend S. Behrman again, added Heron, grinding his teeth. He was up in the city the whole of the time the new schedule was being drawn, and he and Olstein and the Railroad Commission were as thick as thieves. He has been up there all this last week, too, doing the railroad's dirty work, and backing Olstein up. Legitimate profit, he broke out. Can we raise wheat at a legitimate profit with a tariff of $4 a ton for moving it 200 miles to Tidewater with wheat at 87 cents? Why not hold us up with a gun in our faces and say, hands up, and be done with it? He dug his boot heel into the ground and turned away to the house abruptly, cursing beneath his breath. By the way, Presley called after him, Hooven wants to see you. He asked me about this idea of the governor's of getting along without the tenants this year. Hooven wants to stay to tend the ditch and look after the stock. I told him to see you. Heron, his mind full of other things, nodded to say that he understood. Presley only waited till he had disappeared indoors so that he might not seem too indifferent to his trouble, then, remounting, struck at once into a brisk pace and, turning out from the carriage gate, held on swiftly down the lower road going in the direction of Guadalajara. These matters, these eternal fierce bickerings between the farmers of the San Joaquin and the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad, irritated him and wearied him. He cared for none of these things. They did not belong to his world. In the picture of that huge romantic West that he saw in his imagination, these dissensions made the one note of harsh color that refused to enter into the great scheme of harmony. It was material, sordid, deadly commonplace, but however he strove to shut his eyes to it or his ears to it, the thing persisted and persisted. The romance seemed complete up to that point. There it broke, there it failed, there it became realism, grim, unlovely, unyielding. To be true, and it was the first article of his creed to be unflinchingly true, he could not ignore it. All the noble poetry of the ranch, the valley, seemed in his mind to be marred and disfigured by the presence of certain immovable facts. Just what he wanted, Presley hardly knew. On the one hand, it was his ambition to portray life as he saw it, directly, frankly, and through no medium of personality or temperament. But, on the other hand, as well, he wished to see everything through a rose-colored mist, a mist that dulled all harsh outlines, all crude and violent colors. He told himself that as part of the people, he loved the people and sympathized with their hopes and fears, and joys and griefs, and yet Hooven, grimy and perspiring with his perpetual grievance and his contracted horizon, only revolted him. He had set himself the task of giving true, absolutely true, poetical expression to the life of the ranch, and yet again and again he brought up against the railroad what stubborn iron barrier against it which his romance shattered itself to froth and disintegrated, flying spume. His heart went out to the people, and his groping hand met that of a slovenly little Dutchman, whom it was impossible to consider seriously. He searched for the true romance, and in the end found grain rates and unjust freight tariffs. But the stuff is here, he muttered, as he sent his wheel rumbling across the bridge over Broderson Creek. The romance, the real romance, is here somewhere. I'll get a hold of it yet. He shot a glance about him as if in search of the inspiration. By now he was not quite halfway across the northern and narrowest corner of Los Muertos, at this point some 8 miles wide, He was still on the home ranch. A few miles to the south, he could just make out the line of wire fence that separated it from the 3rd Division, and to the north, seen faint and blue through the haze and shimmer of the noon sun, a long file of telegraph poles showed the line of the railroad and marked Eric's northeast boundary. The road over which Presley was traveling ran almost diametrically straight. In front of him, but at a great distance, he could make out the giant live oak and the red roof of Hooven's barn that stood near it. All about him the country was flat. In all directions he could see for miles. The harvest was just over. Nothing but stubble remained on the ground. With the one exception of the live oak by Hooven's place, there was nothing green in sight. The wheat stubble was of a dirty yellow. The ground, parched, cracked, and dry, of a cheerless brown. By the roadside the dust lay thick and gray, and on either hand, stretching on toward the horizon, losing itself in a mere smudge in the distance, ran the illimitable parallels of the wire fence. And that was all. That and the burnt-out blue of the sky and the steady shimmer of the heat. The silence was infinite. After the harvest, small though that harvest had been, the ranches seemed asleep. It was as though the earth, after its period of reproduction, its pains of labor, had been delivered of the fruit of its loins, and now slept the sleep of exhaustion. It was the period between seasons when nothing was being done, when the natural forces seemed to hang suspended. There was no rain, there was no wind, there was no growth, no life. The very stubble had no force even to rot. The sun alone moved. Toward 2 o'clock, Presley reached Hooven's place, 2 or 3 grimy frame buildings infested with a swarm of dogs. A hog or two wandered aimlessly about. Under a shed by the barn, a broken-down cedar lay rusting to its ruin. But overhead, a mammoth live oak, the largest tree in all the countryside, towered superb and magnificent. Gray bunches of mistletoe and festoons of traveling moss hung from its bark. From its lowest branch hung Hooven's meat safe, a square box faced with wire screens. What gave a special interest to Hooven's was the fact that here was the intersection of the lower road and Eric's main irrigating ditch, a vast trench not yet completed, which he and Annixter, who worked the Queen Sabe ranch, were jointly constructing. It ran directly across the road and at right angles to it, and lay a deep groove in the field between Hooven's and the town of Guadalajara, some 3 miles further on. Besides this, the ditch was a natural boundary between 2 divisions of the Los Muertos ranch, the 1st and the 4th. Presley now had the choice of 2 routes. His objective point was the spring at the headwaters of Broderson Creek in the hills on the eastern side of the Queen Sabe ranch. The trail afforded him a shortcut thitherward. As he passed the ranch, Mrs. Hooven came to the door, her little daughter Hilda, dressed in a boy's overalls and clumsy boots, at her skirts. Minna, her oldest daughter, a very pretty girl whose love affairs were continually the talk of all Los Muertos, was visible through a window of the house, busy at the week's washing. Mrs. Hooven was a faded, colorless woman, middle-aged and commonplace, and offering not the least characteristic that would distinguish her from 1,000 other women of her class and kind. She nodded to Presley, watching him with a stolid gaze from under her arm, which she held across her forehead to shade her eyes. But now Presley exerted himself in good earnest. His bicycle flew. He resolved that after all he would go to Guadalajara. He crossed the bridge over the irrigating ditch with a brusque spurt of hollow sound and shot forward down the last stretch of the lower road that had intervened between Hooven's and the town. He was on the 4th Division of the ranch now, the only one whereon the wheat had been successful, no doubt because of the little mission creek that ran through it.